What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel, and it's time for another game preview / game prediction for the 2023 college football season. And our next game preview / game prediction will be between the Minnesota Golden Gophers and the North Carolina Tar Heels, a Week 3 non-conference matchup coming up here this weekend for week number 3 of the college football season. There's not a lot of big-time games, like I mentioned, coming up here for week number 3. I know there are other options out there where I could choose from. You know, there's Washington and Michigan State coming up. I don't think that's going to be a big game now because Mel Tucker is suspended in that game. And, you know, it's really kind of hard to tell how long he will be suspended for. I know there's LSU and Mississippi State coming up. I mean, that's another big-time game there. Georgia and South Carolina, which I don't think that's a game that will be close. But we did a game preview / game prediction on Tennessee and Florida a couple days ago. That's got a ton of views. You can go back and watch that video if you are a Tennessee or Florida fan. But we got Minnesota versus North Carolina here, a Big Ten versus ACC non-conference game here. Going into this matchup, both teams with 2-0 records, but there's a lot of difference between these two teams. So we're going to give you a game preview / game prediction for this game, give you the stat comparisons between these two teams in the first 2 games of the season. And then we'll give you the game summary of who is the favorite going into this game and what time the game will be this upcoming weekend and what channel it will be on as well. And then we'll give you keys to the game here for both of these teams to win this game. And then we'll give you a game prediction, and give you how the game will go down. So that's how the video works. Again, this is a game preview / game prediction. Let's get right into it here with Week 3's matchup here between Minnesota and North Carolina. We'll start with the stat comparisons between these two teams. You look at Minnesota, they're 2-0 going into this game. Minnesota beat Nebraska a couple weeks ago, 13-10, and then they bounced back after, kind of a sluggish game against Nebraska and winning that game a little bit bigger. But they're only averaging 19 points per game. Again, this is a Minnesota team that's kind of struggled on the offensive side of the football in the first couple games. They average about 332 yards per total yards this year. It's kind of rare to see Minnesota there at the 332-yard mark. You kind of expect Minnesota to be there at the 400-yard mark. Again, this offense has really struggled. You look at the passing yards, 156.5 yards per passing. And then the running game. I expected Minnesota, to be a little bit a really good running team. But the thing is, they haven't really showed us that, running style of offense in the first couple games of the year. So, again, Minnesota has really struggled on the offensive side of the football in the first 2 games. You look at the offensive ranking, 105th in the country. And again, they have not been really good on the offensive side of the football, but it's just 2 weeks in. Maybe this offense does get better this weekend, and maybe they get better for the rest of the year. And then defensively, they have a strong defense. They're 9th in the country on defense. So again, this defense is really strong for the Golden Gophers. But again, they're 2-0 going into this game against North Carolina. And speaking of North Carolina, their stat comparisons compared to Minnesota are a big advantage. North Carolina comes into this game with a record of 2-0. They're coming off a couple wins. They won by 2 touchdowns against South Carolina a couple weeks ago in Charlotte. They won that game 31-17. The defense played really well in that game. And then North Carolina survived a double overtime game against Appalachian State, which I said that game was going to be close. I didn't think it was going to be a blowout. North Carolina was favored in 18 points in that game, and they ended up, going into double overtime, but they still were able to survive that game. They're averaging 35.5 points per game, so yeah, there's a big difference in the points per game. North Carolina has a better offense than Minnesota. You look at the total yards per game, 482 yards per total yards this year for this North Carolina offense. Then you look at the passing yards. Drake May, one of the top quarterbacks in the ACC and definitely in the country. He's going to have a big game here this weekend. It's kind of been a sluggish start for him in the first 2 games, but I think he's going to get better down the stretch as the season goes on. But he's averaging about 238.5 yards per passing. The running game's been really strong this year for North Carolina. I like what they're doing with the running game this year. They're kind of focusing on the running game a little bit more than they did the passing game last year. And this team is averaging 243.5 yards per rushing. I think they're one of maybe the second or third best, running teams in the ACC, and probably the second or third or fourth, best running team in the country. And you look at the offense of ranking, they're 10th in the country on offense. So yeah, that number doesn't really surprise me for North Carolina. They're a top 10 offense in the country, and probably, one of the top offenses in the ACC as well. Maybe Florida State's in that conversation, but North Carolina's also in there. Defensively, they kind of had a sluggish game, like I said, this past weekend against Appalachian State. They were good in that first game against South Carolina a couple weeks ago, but their defense is 59th in the country. So stat comparison-wise, North Carolina has an advantage in the offensive, yards and everything in the offensive category. And then defensively, Minnesota has that advantage with the defense. They're 9th in the country. So again, Minnesota's offense is not really overall that good. So those are the stat comparisons here between these two teams. Let's now get to the game summary here. This game will be on Saturday, September 16th at 3:30 Eastern Time. It's an ESPN game, so this is a pretty big game here, especially when it's an ESPN-type game. Game's in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The Tar Heels are the home favorites going into this game, a home field advantage team, I should say. They're going into this game as a 7.5-point favorite. I really am shocked about that number. I'm kind of, surprised this is not a double-digit favorite for North Carolina, because I don't think Minnesota has looked good in the first two games, and I just think based off of their performances in the first couple games, I think North Carolina should be a double-digit favorite. I know the Appalachian State game, they were double-digit favorites. That number should have been a little bit lower, but this weekend, I'm really being, I'm not really thinking that Minnesota is going to have a chance to beat North Carolina this weekend due to the kind of performances that they had. The over and under is at 49, so they're kind of predicting this game to be a low-scoring type game, which I can really see that playing out that way. I mean, I think Minnesota's got a good defense to stop this North Carolina offense for scoring a ton of points in this game. Minnesota, they're the unranked team going into this one. North Carolina 20th in the AP poll. They moved down 3 spots in the AP poll the other day, from just kind of having that rough performance against Appalachian State. I don't think it was a rough performance, but again, it wasn't really good enough of a win. So North Carolina here, 20th ranked team in the country. And again, this game's at 3:30 Eastern Time on ESPN. And according to the FBI, North Carolina has a 72% chance to win against Minnesota in this game. And then the FBI gives Minnesota about a 25% chance to win this game. So again, the FBI likes North Carolina in this game pretty big. But again, North Carolina is just favored by 7.5 points in this game, which I don't think it's a really bad number, but again, I think North Carolina should be favored by double digits, and the over and under is at 49. So again, they're predicting a low-scoring type game here, but let's now get to the keys to the game here. That's your game summary for this upcoming weekend. Keys to the game here for both of these teams. For Minnesota, they have to run the football in this game. The running game hasn't really been strong for them. The passing game hasn't been strong. The offensive line has to step up. The offensive line has not been really good in the first couple games for Minnesota. This is kind of the time where they need to step up, and then they also have to be aggressive on defense. And again, their defense is really strong, but the offense just needs some work to do. And maybe they're going to get better down the stretch, but again, the offense just still has some work to do. And again, it's going to really kind of depend on if Minnesota's a great offense or if they're a bad offense in this game this weekend against North Carolina. For North Carolina, they have to score points. Defense has to make stops. Again, that defense was really good a couple weeks ago against South Carolina. But again, they weren't really good this past weekend against Appalachian State. So again, North Carolina's defense has to make stops on third downs. They have to get the Minnesota offense off the field. And they also have to be aggressive on offense. Again, this offense is very explosive. When you got a guy like Drake May that can throw the deep ball down the field and also can use his legs. I mean, North Carolina's offense is a very dangerous offense to stop. And they also can score points. But I think the Minnesota defense is good enough, to keep North Carolina out of the 30s in this one and also keep them low scoring in the first half as well. But again, keys to the game here for both of these teams. Minnesota has to get that offense going, especially running the football. I think that's their biggest strength this year. And then offensive line has to step up. And their defense, it's good. I mean, their defense is good enough to really be the aggressive defense in this game. And then for North Carolina, they got to score points. Defense has to make stops. They got to get their North Carolina offense on the field pretty much the whole way. And then the offense, they have to be aggressive. I mean, that's the key to the game here for this North Carolina team. And again, these are the keys to the game here for both of these teams. Let's now get to the prediction here for both of these teams. So again, a non-conference game here between Minnesota and North Carolina. It's the Big Ten versus the ACC. The Big Ten's been kind of off to a slow start in the first couple of weeks of the season. The Big Ten, I think, is right now the worst conference in the country. North Carolina, I think they're one of the top, maybe conferences in the country. The ACC looks like it's been a really good conference in the first couple weeks. And then, of course, maybe the second best conference would be them. But, the Pac-12 is also really good. How I think this game will go down, I think it's a low-scoring type game here. I think the first half it will be a low-scoring type game. I think Minnesota can keep North Carolina, their offense off the field for most part. I think Minnesota is going to have to really want to run the football in this game. I think that's going to be their biggest strength of this team. And also, they got to run out the clock. I think they're going to have to use that clock to their advantage to keep North Carolina's offense off the field. But again, this will be a low-scoring type game here in the first half. But I think second half, I do trust the Tar Heels to kind of pull away in the second half, and I think they're going to hold Minnesota's defense or offense to a little bit lesser points. And again, Minnesota's offense is a little bit concerning going into this game. Again, they haven't been really good in the first couple games by the stats that we just showed you and everything. But again, their defense is strong. They're probably one of the second best defenses in the Big Ten as of right now. I think Iowa's just a little bit ahead of them, but again, this game will be a low-scoring type game, but at the end of the day, I think North Carolina pulls away in the second half. They outscored them probably like 14-0. And I think the final score of this game is going to be favoring in the Tar Heels, 24-10. So that's my final score here. I think Minnesota scores points in this game, but not a lot because I think Minnesota's offense still has some work to do. And again, Minnesota's offense just has not been really good in the first couple games. So that's what concerns me going into this game for Minnesota. But the Tar Heels, I think their offense will start to click in the second half. I think their defense kind of, starts to be aggressive as well. But maybe this is a really low-scoring game. North Carolina probably won't get into the 20s. They probably just stay there in the, teenage numbers and everything. So, again, I could probably see this game being 17-10 or maybe 17-3. You never know. The over and under is at 49, so this will be a low-scoring game. Again, Minnesota has a great defense that can stop this North Carolina offense. But again, I think North Carolina pulls away in the second half. So I do like the Tar Heels here to improve to 3-0 and still remain here in the top 25. If Minnesota wins, they probably get in the top 25 based off of their performance on the defense. But again, my final score prediction is 24-10 in favor of the Tar Heels in this non-conference matchup between Minnesota and North Carolina. Let me guys know what you think about this game preview / game prediction. Who's your pick to win this game? Do you think North Carolina wins it, or do you think Minnesota wins it? And what's your final score prediction as well? And stay tuned here for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports Channel.